I'm going to, and I apologize for the young people here, we're going to do like an academic-y kind of talk without quizzes. I think that's the affiliation branding. I will probably spiel with a couple of mini breaks for about 40-ish minutes, and then we'll have time for questions at the end, is kind of what it looks like. But if you get bored, just play on your phones. I think that's great. Like, I don't mind. That's for everybody, not just for the young people. I used to be a 9th grade English teacher, so I'm used to interruptions. I don't know where the bathroom is in this building, but feel free to go. You don't need to pass. Just do what you need to do. And I want to start with a picture. So I used to teach in South Central Los Angeles. Let's move the snake. I used to teach in South Central Los Angeles, and the school I taught at served nutrition to all of our students every day. Right? The students got a breakfast that was provided after the first period of class. And does anyone know what this is a picture of? I don't think they serve these in the Stanford dorms. It's not a pizza. Do you know what it is? It's like a pie. Yeah, it's a PB&J. It's called a Smucker's Uncrustable. TM. There's probably like a trademarking thing here. I'm probably getting sued after this talk. And this was my students' favorite breakfast that they got of the different kinds of things that our school served. Sometimes they got bad fruit. Sometimes that was expired. Sometimes they did get pizza, but the pizza wasn't good. It was like school pizza that was bad school pizza. But when they got these, it was the best because it's basically a PB&J sandwich without crust, hence Uncrustable. Except there's one thing to say about it, and that is that they were served cold because they were all kept in the freezer so they wouldn't go bad by the time they're served to students. And if you've ever had a frozen peanut butter and jelly sandwich, there is a puck that will just take out your teeth hidden in the middle of it, right? Like that's how peanut butter works when it's frozen. So I apologize for the dentists that the students are probably visiting today. But one day the students were complaining because they were 9th graders, and they wanted and they wished that these were better in different kinds of ways. And I reverted back to my college days and remembered and gave them this advice that if you complain about something, you get free stuff, right? And so I said, let's take a picture, which they did with their phone, and write a complaint letter together, which I'm going to read to all of you now. Dear Smuckers, please put less peanut butter in your Uncrustables, hence the teeth thing, as I mentioned. Please put in more jelly than peanut butter. It would also be nice if you made them bigger. They're hungry. They're 9th graders. As a class at South Central High School, I'm going to call the school I'm talking about South Central, we think it's unfair that the Uncrustable was not what we expected. Because it is called an Uncrustable, we didn't think it would have crust. However, as you can see in this picture, and then they used a pen as like a pointing device. As you can see in this picture, it has a crust. We call this false advertising. Smuckers, you are a liar. Now they just go all in. You are a liar. Bring us more food. We would like other flavors. What if you took out the peanut butter and put in honey or strawberry instead? So they're just kind of ideating. This would be like a Stanford D school, design school kind of a thing. We look forward to hearing from you soon, sincerely in my advisory class. And then they didn't get a response. They got the Smuckers run around, and it was just a thank you for contacting Smuckers customer service. We take your complaints very seriously, and then nothing. But it did have a phone number at the end. And I said, you know what you have to do if you don't get free stuff, you have to escalate. And so we then used a cell phone, put it on speakerphone, and I modeled for them. That poor customer service agent that day. Right? I said, my name's Antero. I'm calling on behalf of, there's 30 hungry 9th graders in the room on the call with you. We had a conversation about why, turns out there are lots of other flavors. It just turned out that Los Angeles Unified School District doesn't actually provide other flavors. And so they took the advice seriously. We end up not getting the free snack that I thought we would get free stuff out of this. I apologize for the sad ending to this story. But I share this to think about what are the playful possibilities that can come out of the kind of taken for granted technologies that already exist in our classrooms, right? It wasn't my phone. I have a phone, right? Most of us do. And it wasn't mine that we used in the classroom. A student, once I said take a picture, quickly grabbed their cell phone, took a picture. I said, can anyone make a phone call for us? Someone quickly dialed and put on speakerphone, right? We're able to use just the kinds of technology that exists in classrooms and in pockets of students everywhere. And so that's what I'm interested in us thinking about is what if we take for granted all of the technology that people take for granted outside of schools and that we tend to punish kids for. And what if we take for granted that play is probably a really useful way for us to think about how people learn. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. A little bit more about me. So I'm like an English assistant professor. I used to be an English professor when I was in Colorado, when I moved from Los Angeles. Former English teacher, so I taught lots of high school-y stuff. I mainly focus on literacies and civic identity. And so I'm going to talk about both of those pieces today. Because I'm from Los Angeles, I'm really good at sitting in traffic. And so I'm not sure how that comes in handy, but I'll just mention it now. And I'm usually reading, I spend a lot of time thinking about young adult literature and children's literature as part of thinking about how kids learn. So I'm usually reading like a nerdy, boring book and a more fun, embarrassing book that I take on an airplane with me. And so right now I'm reading a book about the future called The Future, and it's like the historical understanding of what we mean by the future in academic literature. And then I'm reading a book called Mightier Than the Sword, which is a children's book where you're dropped into, you are the protagonist, are dropped into an imaginary world, and all you have with you is a pencil, and whatever you write turns into reality, and you use that to find your way out. I also play and study a lot of board games, which I'm not going to talk about here today. But I'll tell you the game I'm playing right now is called Flamme Rouge. I try not to do exercise as much as possible, so instead I play games where you pretend to be a bicyclist. And this is great, right? I usually lose as well. It's really disappointing. I'm going to get into nerdy stuff in a minute, but maybe if there's someone next to you that you haven't met before, let's take like 1 minute. Just turn to them and tell them either something you are reading or playing lately. Even if you know them, tell them. If you don't like who they are, it's okay. This will be over soon. But just take like 1 minute to do that. Good. All right, that's good enough. That's good enough. Let's get back to work. Okay. So great. I hope you learned something new. If you heard a really good recommendation, share it during the question and answer period at the end. It saves me having to think of something, and then you can just share for all of us. It's great. So here's what we're going to do with our remaining 40 minutes before you get to ask questions. I'm going to give some theory stuff around technology. It'll be boring, but it'll be over soon. I'm going to give some theory stuff around gaming. It'll be a little less boring, and it will also be over soon. And then I'm going to go into an ethnography of what this stuff looked like in my own 9th grade English classroom when I was doing this research as a teacher in a classroom. I've told my students I'm not so great at email. It's just the nature of working here. Lots of people want to email you things. My students have found the workaround if they want a quick response and they tweet me. That says something probably about mobile technology. You are all invited to send me a tweet. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. Don't do it. But before we get started with any of that, let's play a quick game. We are going to play a game, and this requires your phone if you have one. This game is called Game of Phones. The way the Game of Phones works is just look at the people around you. That's who you're playing with. There might be 3-ish people around you. Like this is all of you are playing together. Congratulations, right? Like that is the kind of group. You're the people you can look at quickly. One of you is the judge. Go ahead and figure out who that is right now. Just point at that person. Great, excellent. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a prompt. Respond to the prompt within 1 minute, and the judge picks a winner, and that's it. Here it is. Show your app of shame to the judge. The judge picks a winner. Go. Judges, pick your winner. All right, great. You did it. Let's come back. Did anyone have a particularly embarrassing app that you want to point out to other people? Yeah, what was it? Kick the bunny. The buddy, not an animal.
It is a person, but it's a kid's game.
Kick the buddy.
These guys know it.
All right, excellent. I see a stock app. Excellent. nice and riveting excitement. Anyone else have one more boring app that you want to share? Or app of shame, sorry. Dragondale, excellent. I'm not going to share my apps of shame with you for today. Be great. Okay. I do want to say, so this is a game I play with high school students. It is a game I play with teachers. It's a game I use with people who are becoming teachers. And it's a deck of cards, right? And what is useful about the Game of Phones is it's very simple, right? I was able to very quickly provide some rules. It doesn't really matter who wins, but it's an excuse to build up a conversation, right? We can quickly use a prompt like this. Most people have phones today, and we're able to have a conversation around them and say, I downloaded this, I keep meaning to delete this, right? There's lots of different ways that people can talk about what it is. And what you mean by shame is a whole other thing, right? There's a whole, that's all I'm going to say. Okay. So I want to talk about digital technology stuff. And so I'm going to do this from two different sources of things I've written. One is an incredible book. It came out last year, and it's on an academic press, which means it's way overpriced. It's called Good Reception, and the second half of this talk is the findings from it. So you don't need to read it, because I'm just going to tell you all the good parts. But it makes a great Christmas or Hanukkah present, so buy 30 copies of it. The other is a report that I wrote for educators and like educational coaches, and it is a free PDF. And I made a URL for it, and so people are welcome to download that. But I'm also just going to give you the good parts of that too, so you don't need to download that either. But here's a couple of key ideas I want us to think about when we think about technology. And this is how I think other people get technology wrong, particularly in educational settings. The key thing I want us to recognize is that technology is fluid. Oftentimes, historically, we've talked about technology as this thing where you go online, right? Or you go into a virtual world and play a game like Fortnite, right? And you go somewhere else as if you're going on to Facebook. And that's not really how we do technology, even though we talk about it that way. Instead, when we think about the ways that technology happens in two different spaces at the same time. This is Emma Gonzalez. She was part of the March for Our Lives movement. And this was a young person, right, who was trying to speak up about gun violence in the United States. And she did that both through online social media. She's still very active in online spaces. But those have led towards real-world kinds of movements, right? Even where I live in Redwood City, we had a demonstration around March for Our Lives as a result of the organization that happened both online and offline, right? That you happen in these two different spaces. There's another boring academic book by someone named Zeynep Tufekci. And she talks about, she studies what online protest looks like. And she was in Istanbul, Turkey, when there's government protest, and looked at both how Twitter was leading towards strategies and organizing principles, as well as what's happening online and in the streets, right? So again, what happens in these fluid spaces? What does this look like in our classrooms is this. This was my principal's desk one morning. The principal and the assistant principals and the deans and the security guards basically went around before school started and took all of the students' earbuds. This was before the wireless ones, right? And they basically told the students, you can come back after school and get them back. I don't know how that works. I also feel like if I don't get tenure here at Stanford, I'm going to become a modern art photographer based on this picture. This is, I think, the most beautiful thing I've ever taken a picture of. But it speaks volumes to how we treat technology in schools, right? It's a distrust of the kinds of technology that students like, right? And an emphasis on technology that's oftentimes overpriced and doesn't work very well in schools today and hasn't for decades. My colleague Thomas Phillip at Berkeley and I have talked about this as the context, not the tool, right? We spend a lot of time worrying about and policing particular kinds of technologies, phones, but we don't think about the context in which young people are learning today. And if we shift, we might rethink what our relationships with technology might look like. And I'm going to look at some of those examples in a bit. So I think that's the key way I want us to think about technology to start us off. I'm going to switch over and talk about gaming. Games, I study a lot of games. As Janice mentioned, I've been studying tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons. It is the nerdiest thing ever. And somehow Stanford still hired me to come work here, which is incredible. And so I want to talk about why I've been studying tabletop games when most of the kids I talk to today are playing things like Fortnite and are playing things like Call of Duty and lots of other kinds of games that might have kinds of representations that parents might be worried about. So there's two assumptions around games and learning that I want us to talk about. The first assumption is there's really powerful learning that happens in digital games. This is a screenshot of World of Warcraft, which is an online virtual world that's been going on for over a decade, right? And if we kind of look at the information that's on here, it's wildly complex, right? There's statistics all around the side. There's a chat screen. There are icons of stuff that I don't know what they are. There is a log of text happening on the bottom left. And there's the actual things that are happening in the middle of the screen, which there's so much pieces of information happening there that it's hard to even make meaning of it, right? If we were playing that game, we might make more sense of it. But there's a lot of stuff going on in that picture. This is a similar kind of online game called EVE Online. EVE Online, you play a spaceship and you go around and work with other spaceships and probably blow up other people's spaceships. The one thing that's different from this game from a lot of other games is those spaceships have a monetary value that's associated with the real world. So if some new person comes in and a veteran comes in and blows up their spaceship, they just lost a bunch of money, like real money. They're out of money now, unless they put more money into the system. When there's huge battles, and if you're excited about this, there are history books about wars that happen in EVE Online. And when there's so many people fighting on two different sides of a battle, the game slows down to 10% of the speed so people can make calculated decisions that feel fair. And so you slow down the virtual world of this in order for everybody to participate. This is Second Life. Second Life is a virtual world where people just get to go and hang out. And this is a protest during the Occupy movement that was happening in Second Life. And so when you think about the kinds of civic identities that people can think about, how do you try on being an activist in an online space? And then can you take those identities and move them out of the online space and then maybe feel more comfortable being an activist in non-online spaces? This is Minecraft. This is a working calculator that someone built inside of Minecraft. What this tells me is that someone can essentially program a computer inside of Minecraft, which someday you'll be able to play Minecraft inside of Minecraft. and then I just have to take a nap. That just hurts my head to think about. But if we look at all these examples, right, there's some really powerful stuff that happens in all of these spaces, really robust kinds of learning, and that learning isn't tied to just individuals with the computer. It's not just one-on-one. There's a big collaborative community that's happening. So that's one assumption. The other assumption, though, that I think educational research hasn't talked a lot about is that people can be pretty terrible to one another in online spaces at the same time as well, right? There's a big culture that has been that is harassed and caused violence towards women, towards people of color, towards individuals of the LGBTQ community. And so this is Anita Sarkeesian. She's made a bunch of different web series. She has a web series called Feminist Frequencies, where she and her colleagues essentially make videos that critique representations of women in video games over time. Right? Women are trophies. Women need to be saved. Women are over-sexualized in these games. And so she just makes videos that critique this, right, in really powerful ways that I think are necessary. And as a result, she's gotten numerous death threats. She's had to move. The locations and names and phone numbers and contact information of her family has been posted online for people to harass her. And she is not the only one by any means, right? That this is a common occurrence for many people. Right? And so as someone who's been studying games and learning, I have a hard time recognizing that games are really powerful for learning when they oftentimes are set up in a way where the culture excludes and actively harasses members of people who could be learning from these spaces. I think this is a real tension that we need to be thinking about. I think about this from local farm-to-table critic or chef Alice Waters. She has a quote that I think about a lot around this. She says, "The table is a civilizing place. It's where a group comes and they hear points of view. They learn about courtesy and kindness. They learn about what it is to live in a community, live in a family first, but live in a bigger community." That's where it comes from. And this is what led me to think about all of this academic literature talks about games and video games and learning and all of this stuff. But what if we shift all of that and think about what happens when we just move games into a place like a tabletop game where you have to look at people eye to eye and actually, if you're going to be a jerk to someone, you have to do it to their face, right? As my uncle did. He was a real jerk at checkers. It's great. Yeah, that's right. I said it. So I think about this in terms of gaming literacies. As a literacy scholar, right? Where do we read and write within games? So one place we do it is from literature, the little g game, right? You can read and write within the game of Mario, right? Or within the game of Chutes and Ladders, which has an amazing history to it. You can read it within the platform. If you're playing a video game, right? The ways my hands might move on a phone if I'm playing a game on my phone or on a Nintendo Switch, right? Is a very different kind of relationship. Or if I'm rolling dice, right? Maybe that's where the game is. Maybe the game is in how I'm making tactical decisions when I'm thinking about that game. Okay, that person's going to go here. So actually the game is me thinking about, well, if my uncle is going to try to take my king, I'm going to double jump him over here. And I'm going to get him this time, and I forget the other piece that he's going to take. It might be in the group that I'm interacting with, right? When I'm sitting around with other people, the game is actually that social interaction with lots of other people. Or the game might actually be the culture around the game, right? The meta game of how we're interacting and thinking about play and the culture around us, right? I will say that oftentimes when we think about games and learning, the literature mainly focuses on these two places, right? What happens within Minecraft, right? Or what happens when people collaborate around Minecraft. And we don't think about these other layers of where games happen. And I've been interested in, as the place that we oftentimes exclude, women, the LGBTQ community, the sociocultural context of games as shaping all of this stuff too. What does this have to do with anything? Good question. Let's move forward. But before we move forward, let's play another game real quick. I forgot to put these slides in basically to make sure that I don't put you all to sleep. And so we're going to take another quick break. Same group, choose a different judge. Point to that new judge now. Great. Same rules. Here's the new prompt. Ready? Show the last photo you took before the game started. Has to be appropriate. Some of you might be a little freaky, I get it. Go. Pick a winner. All right. All right, let's go ahead and come back. Does anyone want to share the picture that you thought was a winner? Like, tell us what it is. Yeah, what was your picture? Say it again. Oh, it was a picture on campus. That's great. Oh, yay, Stanford. That's great. Thank you. One other picture that was a winner? Someone want to describe it? What was the picture that was the winner over here? It was a picture of me? That's great. Extra credit. That's great. Yeah, last one. Oh, the Stanford women's basketball team. Pretty good. Go Stanford and me as part of Stanford. Excellent. Okay. So, second half of this talk, we talked about games and we talked about technology. Let's see what this actually looks like in classrooms. I was a high school English teacher for 8 years. And the last few years, I was working on my PhD at the same time. And so I was doing this work in my classroom. And so I had a couple of research questions that I was thinking about. And so the first question is, how are youth social practices affected by mobile devices in schools? There's actually a bunch of literature on what do kids do with their phones outside of schools in informal environments. But we haven't done a lot, and part of it is access. We haven't done a lot of what kids do with phones in schools. And I was like, I can answer that, no problem, I got that. Other question, once we understand what kids do in terms of the culture of technology in schools, what's that mean in classrooms? What are the possibilities of technology in classrooms? I was like, I'm a teacher, I can do that, no problem, got this. So a little bit about where I was doing this work. There's a school that I'm calling South Central Los Angeles, or South Central High School. It's in South Central Los Angeles. The school was 3,400 students at the time that I taught there. It was about 80% black, 80% Latino, about 20% black, very high free and reduced lunch rate, 67% dropout rate. I never had a white student when I taught there. There was one white student on campus at the time that I did this study. It was like Finding Waldo when you found that student. And then the other thing I'll say is this free and reduced lunch rate should be higher. It should be closer to 100%. But ninth graders are knuckleheads and don't actually turn in the paperwork, so they don't get the free and reduced lunch. That's just how ninth graders often are. And so just recognizing that these are the statistics. I share these because I think oftentimes we have stereotypes about who our students are, and the numbers can tell you one story. And I want to tell you a different story about who my students are, right? So I want to start with, this is a stereotype about what South Central looks like. In 2003, Los Angeles' city council voted to change the name of the area where we taught to South Los Angeles because they wanted to move from the stereotypes of what South Central meant historically, right? But the entire time I taught there, no one ever called it anything but South Central, right? This is the identity. This is who that space is. And simply because a bunch of bureaucrats renamed it doesn't make it something other than what it is. So I want to recognize that we can think about that name pejoratively, and if you Google it, you get pejorative images, and that is not what this school is about. Okay. So there are two phases to what this study was. The first phase, I was going to look across the entire campus and just look at and talk to kids about how they use phones, right? Just want to understand. This is me observing like a creep. This is what researchers do, right? And do focus groups with young people. And then the second phase was I had a bunch of students that I was working with closely in ninth grade classrooms. Think about how could we play with phones in classrooms once we have a better understanding together about what they could do. Those are the two phases. The second phase, I gave all of my ninth graders in one class iPod Touches. I gave them iPod Touches because I did not have the research budget that Stanford affords me. And so iPod Touches are much cheaper than iPhones because they don't have a monthly bill. And they do exactly the same thing except this part, right? But no one ever actually calls on an iPhone nowadays, particularly young people. So for all intents and purposes, the iPod is a phone, just without the phone part, and no one wants the phone part. And there's an app for that anyways. Okay. For real, there's an app for that, right? WhatsApp. Okay. So across all of the different students that I interviewed over 100 students. I talked to teachers. I did observations in classrooms. My own student, these are all pseudonyms, Minerva, best represented what technology and cell phones are like on campus. I asked her, I said, can you tell me how much time you spend at school on your mobile device? The whole day. The exclamation mark is really important to understand how Minerva talks. You spend the whole day on it, mostly. What do? Everything, right? And if any of you have spent time in schools recently, that's a pretty accurate description of what it looks like. Kids are on their phones all the time. I'll also say, we can nod our heads like, yeah, I know. But y'all are on their phones all the time too. So I just want to recognize that there's two different faces to this. They're on their phones so often that oftentimes kids, when they want to get off their phones, is during passing period and lunchtime in order to interact with people that they see face to face. They need to take a break from their devices during lunchtime. One student gave me a quote that I think represents this. The student said, there's so much to do like during lunch that I might say, hold up, I'm going to check this message during fourth period. And I want us to think about this for a second because it's really important, right? This runs counter to how we think about technology in schools, right? It is a conflict between the policies and practices of teachers. This is what kids really do. There's a conflict between what we assume students are supposed to do and what students really want to do, right? The SFUSD policy, and this is generally for most classrooms, is something like this. During lunch period and during passing periods, you can use your phones. During class time, unless I specifically tell you and it's for academic purposes, you need to put them away. Right? Does that sound like the kind of policy we've heard of? Okay? And it kind of makes sense, right? You came here for school. Damn it, I want you to pay attention. I want you to pay attention in my classroom. Right? That policy is a policy that reinforces working class kinds of identities and jobs. Right? That's a policy if I work at McDonald's. Right? I can't use my cell phone when I'm working at McDonald's. It's a policy if I'm doing the service industry or if I'm cleaning. Right? If I am a fancy Stanford professor, if I am a teacher, I am allowed to make choices about how I use my cell phone. You all were playing the game of phones. I checked my phone. I checked, make sure I didn't have anything going on. I'm allowed to make those decisions as someone who has a middle class or better job, right? When we create these policies, we're schooling kids towards specific kinds of identities with these policies. So I want to recognize that as one key tension, right? There's a whole bunch of other things we need to think about in terms of power relationships and technology as well, but I want to recognize this conflict. Also, the one time students don't want to be on their phones is during passing period and lunch. Or the two times students don't want to be on their phones is passing periods and lunch, right? That's the only time they actually get to look at people face to face that they actually want to look at, not their teacher, right? And if that's the case, why is that the time when we want them to spend time looking at their phones? How are we schooling their socializing practices as well? So this is a real tension. At the time I was doing this study, students were also engaged in civic demonstrations around budget cuts in Los Angeles. We're also looking at a possible teacher strike this year, so these are still ongoing. And so students shared some of the text messages that they got. This one says, forward, 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 forward. Sit down this Friday. They're organizing a walkout, and hopefully another walkout forward to all students, doesn't matter what school. This did lead to many students from our school and other schools in LAUSD from walking out. Right? And I want us to think about the ways that the anonymity of this message played a role in people being able to circulate it. Right? So as we think about phones, as we think about what it means to have a civic identity, particularly right now when I walk past lawn signs for city council members I don't know in Redwood City, what does it mean for students to gain a civic identity? What's it mean to be engaged with the world around them, both in proximity and the world around them broadly and culturally? What does it mean for students to connect civically through a device like this? So a couple of key things to think about, and this is now shifting into putting these devices into my classroom. The first thing I want us to recognize, portable needs to be personal. So I gave all of my students iPod touches, which are phones, just without the phone part, on one day. A couple hours later, I got a text message from one student in my class named Holden. We're going to look at the text message together. These are all pseudonyms. 3:17. Holden says, I've been robbed from my iPod. It's Holden from third period. Very eloquently, I wasn't a Stanford professor yet. I said, say what? He said, it's Holden from your third period. I've just been robbed for the iPod. And then I put things together. I said, wait a minute. How do you have a phone to tell me about this if you were robbed? And he said, because I hid my phone and he didn't find it, but somebody took the iPod, right? Which makes sense. Right? Some stupid teacher gave him this device and said, hey, use this. We're going to use it in class together. And then your actual phone with all of the personal stuff on it, your apps of shame, the photos that you took, right? All of those things. When someone's going to come and rob you in South Central, not to perpetuate stereotypes, you're going to give them the thing that doesn't have that personal value to it in order to protect the thing that actually has some emotional capital for you, right? If we want to take seriously these one-to-one programs where students have iPods or laptops or Chromebooks in their classroom, we need to recognize that the portable needs to be personal, right? I need to have some kind of value inscribed into this device, and Holden is a really useful representation of that, right? So some quick numbers. Day one, I gave my students 20 iPods, gave them all out. They all look like this too. Again, modern art photographer. It's incredible. I think it's beautiful. Day two, as you saw from Holden, 19 iPods. By the end of this study, 6 iPods. That's great. I didn't pay for them. We should think about this relationship, right? What's it mean to lose an iPod? Should I be that worried if I lose that? What's it mean to invest in iPods rather than invest in teachers? What do they cost? These iPods cost $200. Yeah. I will follow up 2 years after I did this study. LAUSD, again, the second biggest school district in the country, gave every middle and high school student in the district an iPad, which cost at least $400 at the time, but cost more. We don't know how much more, but the statistic was they cost more than if you went into an Apple store and bought it off the shelf. And the reason it cost more is LAUSD paid to put testing software on every single iPad that they put on them. Those iPads, they also put a bunch of security software on them to make sure kids didn't hack them. That lasted for 3 weeks. That led to that superintendent getting fired. So we should talk, I think that cost is a really important question. Okay, next finding. Distraction really mattered. Kids were really distracted. These are screenshots from the students in my class. Look at all those apps of shame the student had. The students had a lot of different pieces of technology, but I also want to recognize, as much as this is a thing where as a teacher, I could be frustrated that, why are you playing Angry Birds right now? You're in my English class, right? As much as I could be frustrated by that, this was a student making this device personal for him, right? Not only did he download the things that he wanted, he also customized the screen behind him so it looked like that, right? There's a performativity to this of who the student wanted to be. Right? Students perform particular kinds of identities through their phones. I have a particularly boring case, right? But some of you might have cases that have personal meaning on them to you. You might have, I have a really funny picture of a guy who looks like my brother-in-law, and it always embarrasses him. So I've had it on my phone as like my background picture for 2 years, just for like when I see him every couple times a year to say, like, look at this picture of this guy who looks like you. But I always forget that because my picture used to be of my dogs, and so people will talk about their dogs. Like, I have a dog, and then it's a picture of a guy. It's really embarrassing. It happens a lot, right? But that's a personal inscription that I've made and written on my device, right? Many of you probably have similar kinds of things, but you probably don't have like that embarrassing brother-in-law picture. These are ways that students foster proximity to their peers. Students like, oh, how is the keyboard Pro app, right? Like this allows for people to have conversation, or hey, how did you get your phone to look like that, right? These allowed people to do these kinds of things. But it also meant distraction, right? In the 67 days that we participated in this study in my classroom, I coded 138 times that I had to verbally tell students, hey, pay attention, put away your devices for a second. I need you to stop playing that. Like all of those annoying things that teachers do. I did it a lot, right? And I want to recognize that. So recognizing some of these tensions and challenges around technology, I want to talk about the play part of the study. I created a game. This game is called Ask a Nazi. I have to put the title up here because if I just say it, it sounds like Ask a Nazi, which in 2018 means something very different. And so Ask a Nazi is a game based on the West African folklore hero Anansi. Anansi is a trickster, oftentimes takes the place of a spider. There's a very famous story about Anansi by the same person who illustrated the Very Hungry Caterpillar. This is the cover from that. And this is a different kind of game from, I think, what we typically think about with games, right? This game went like this. It's an alternate reality game, and the story is one day, so one of the folklore pieces around Anansi is that Anansi tricked Lion and now has all of the stories in the world, right? That is like part of the folklore of who Anansi is. And so the story is, my students received a text message from Anansi. It was me. My students received a text message from Anansi and said, hey, I'm Anansi, I'm here. It was much more spookier. By the way, I can tell you any story you want about your community. And students were able to ask whatever questions they wanted, and Anansi would help tell their story, tell the story of what they wanted to know. Right? Students would ask questions like, and then they responded, they'd send these questions to Anansi. Anansi would write back playfully. But Anansi's a trickster. Anansi doesn't just tell you the story you want to know. Anansi gave you other kinds of things. So some of the questions students asked: why is there so much violence in my community? Why is the food so bad at South Central High School? Why is there an absence of love in our community? Right? The students asked these different kinds of questions, and from those questions, Anansi, instead of saying, here's the story about violence in South Central Los Angeles, Anansi said, can you get a second source? Can you ask your parents about this and record what they say? Right? Can you take a picture of why the food is so bad in this area? Right? And from that, the students started documenting things, right? They would start going on through inquiry, right, to participate in the story. We also started using those spider rings that you can only find during Halloween unless you Google them and find them. And then students started kind of creating a scavenger hunt, exploring the world and helping Anansi get better information to tell the stories that they wanted to tell. Right? This is one student labeling the only green shrub on our campus and trying to put up a note to explain what was happening in this space. Through playing this game and playing scavenger hunt-like pieces to this, we saw different kinds of leadership show up. So this is a student I called Dante. Dante basically looked like this every day in our class. He would just kind of sit in the back with his headphones in. He warned me that he made his last teacher cry, so I should leave him alone. He said, challenge accepted. And so Dante, once he learned that there's this scavenger hunt game we're going to explore the community, he got super competitive. And so every day he would text message me all of the things he was writing on his phone in ways that I never would have been able to see. And he would run around campus, usually get yelled at by security guards. I'd have to remind him that remind him that I had this agreement with the principal. My students were going to be running around. And we'd start exploring and understanding what our world is, right? So this is a spider dangling from a rafter with dental floss. I keep things fancy. And it led students to find this room. And it's a room that is a mess and is discarded. Those are all school parking permits on the floor. I don't really know why. We never actually had parking permits the entire time I was there. And it allowed students to think about, why is this space being used like this when there's a teacher who has to move from classroom to classroom because there's not enough space in our school, right? Why does this have to exist? And it allowed students to start asking different kinds of questions. It allowed students to start curating and renaming the spaces around them, right? There's a big space behind a chain link fence, and the students called it the wasteland. And we've basically started thinking about it as like museum placards, where we put them up so that other students could start exploring the world around them, right? They'd come up to this placard, and instead of saying, oh, this is the place with discarded junk, it's like, oh, that's the wasteland. I've named it, right? From critical theory around education, we talk about when you name something, you give it power. We can think about what that looks like. I called this entire model inform, perform, transform. We first started informing ourselves, telling ourselves stories. Then we started performing those stories around by labeling the area around us. And that became a transformative act of reimagining not what other people have defined South Central Los Angeles as, but for us to reclaim those narratives around evidence that we've developed. This led to the Critical Design and Gaming School. This is a public high school that's a couple miles away and is based on some of the principles of play that are in a snapshot here. One of the teachers I helped develop this with is this guy. His name is Travis Miller. He was my mentor teacher when I was a student teacher. I taught in his classroom. And then he became the 9th grade English teacher, and I would be the 11th and 12th grade teacher, and there's a middle teacher who won't talk about him, but he was a good friend too. And we had this kind of progression where we knew all of the students, and we had this really powerful relationship with all of them.
How big was the school?
3,400 students. So Travis always had this poster in his classroom. It said, "What if your teacher is wrong?" And I love that positionality. So Travis was teaching ninth graders, and I'm going to end with this story that Travis shared. He was teaching ninth graders the Holocaust memoir Night by Elie Wiesel. Do people know this story? It's actually a really good book for ninth graders, I think, because it teaches imagery in really powerful ways, engages in the history in really powerful ways. But Travis was thinking about the demographics of who our students were and trying to figure out how do I engage students who might not have an emotional attachment to the Holocaust about the Holocaust. And so he came up with a thought experiment. We can critique it, but here's his thought experiment. He said, imagine that people of color got together and decided that white people of European descent have had control of this land for 500 years and have not done much to preserve its resources or benefit most of its people. Therefore, as of tomorrow, all white people and people of white descent will be rounded up for deportation. Their property will be redistributed amongst people of color. He said, what do you do? Right? This was his opening part to move into Night. The first responses were gleeful. One student said, if all the white people are gone, then we can live in their nice houses. A male student said there'd be job openings. Another student said that people of color would have to run the government and make fair laws. A moment of concern came when a student said she could not do without Eminem. This prompted students to worry about white relatives. This is before the new Eminem album. Then the mood shifted, and a student said if there are no white people, then everything's going to be dirty. Many students agreed. Another student said there would be no more doctors. The class agreed. Then a student said there would be no more PlayStations or inventions. And so Travis came up to me during the passing period after this and said, I want to tell you what happened. And we had like 5 minutes, like, whoa, didn't expect that. And then he had to go teach again, right? And there's a story that I continue to stay with, that continues to stay with me, right? Because none of these are things that students read in a text, right? There's no text that people of color don't make things dirty, right? Or don't invent things, or can't be doctors, right? But by the time students have become ninth graders, that's an implicit lesson that they've experienced every day in the kinds of conditions of what schooling looks like, in the messaging that they see in social media and around them, right? These are the implicit messages that happen around them every day. And Travis reminds us of what are the civic opportunities that happen in our classrooms every day that school students around who they get to be and under what kinds of contexts. Right? So as we think about, I came up with like a cutesy title for this talk, right? How games and phones help kids learn, right? And it sounds like it's a low stakes conversation, right? But what this is about is the well-being of entire generations of young people, right? What's it mean to be a young person of color in America today in an era of Black Lives Matter, in an era of Me Too, right? What are those kinds of narratives? How do they seep into our classrooms? They come into our pockets and phones every day. And teachers are afraid to talk about them because of the politics that are associated with them. They think they'll get fired, right? It's inflicting trauma on young people. It's inflicting trauma on teachers. I talk a little bit about this, again, in this really boring book. Get it for a friend if they're having trouble sleeping at night. But I'm going to take questions in a second, but I'm going to offer questions for all of you to think about. And so these are the questions that I've been thinking about around this work. How does educational technology shape in-school student identities? What relational and narrative-driven opportunities can teachers cultivate? And how do we support teachers vis-a-vis the shifting context of schooling? I think I put that just to show off I could use the phrase vis-a-vis and impress all of you. I also just want to recognize before I end, as someone who's not very tech savvy, I'm really proud that I made this spider go up and down. Look at that. I did that. Okay. Thank you.